The community center sat at the corner of a quiet street, its brick walls faded slightly with time but still standing strong like everything else in the neighborhood. Inside, rows of folding chairs had been set up facing a long table, where a few organizers shuffled papers and adjusted microphones. People filtered in slowly, greeting each other in low voices. Some familiar with one another, others simply there because the notice said the meeting was important. Marcus walked in without drawing attention to himself. He wore a simple jacket, nothing that stood out, and carried a small notebook in his hand. His posture was calm, his expression neutral, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway if someone looked long enough. He glanced around the room once, taking in the faces, the seating, the quiet patterns of who sat where and who spoke to whom. Most people grouped themselves naturally. Friends sat together, neighbors leaned in close conversations, and a few empty seats remained scattered along the edges of the room. Marcus chose one of those, near the middle, but slightly off to the side, placing his notebook on his lap as he sat down. At the front, a man in his 50s tapped the microphone lightly. "All right, let's get started," he said, his voice carrying just enough to bring the room into focus. Conversations faded, chairs shifted, and attention moved forward. "This meeting is about the new neighborhood security proposal," he continued. "There have been concerns about safety, and we're here to discuss possible changes." A few heads nodded. Someone in the back crossed their arms. Another person leaned forward, already invested. The man explained the proposal in detail. Increased patrols, stricter visitor policies, more surveillance cameras. Each point was presented as a solution, something meant to protect the community. On the surface, it all sounded reasonable. But Marcus listened differently. He didn't just hear the words, he noticed the tone, the assumptions behind certain phrases, the way some ideas were framed more strongly than others. He noticed who people looked at when certain concerns were mentioned, and who they didn't look at all. When the organizer finished, he stepped back slightly. "We'll open the floor for comments," he said. Hands went up almost immediately. A woman in the front row spoke first, her voice confident. "I think the cameras are a good idea," she said. "We've had too many unfamiliar faces around lately." A man beside her nodded. "Yeah, especially at night," he added. "You just don't know who's coming through." Another voice joined in. "It's about keeping the neighborhoods safe," someone said from the side. The conversation built quickly, people reinforcing each other's concerns, repeating similar points in slightly different ways. The tone stayed polite, but there was an undercurrent to it, something unspoken but clearly present. Marcus waited. He didn't raise his hand immediately. He let the room settle into its rhythm, let the same ideas circle around until there was a pause. Then he lifted his hand slightly. The organizer glanced in his direction, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yes, go ahead." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements steady. A few people turned to look at him, their expressions neutral at first, but curious. "I understand the concern for safety," he began, his voice calm, "and even that matters to everyone here." A few heads nodded. "But I think we should take a closer look at what we mean when we say unfamiliar faces," he continued. The room shifted slightly. It wasn't loud, just a subtle change. A woman near the front frowned. "We just mean people who don't belong here," she said. Marcus met her gaze briefly. "And how do we decide who belongs?" he asked. There was a pause. "Not long, but noticeable. It's obvious," a man said from the back. "You can tell." Marcus nodded slowly. "Can you?" he asked. The question hung there, not aggressive, not confrontational, just present. Another person spoke up, a bit sharper this time. "Look, we're not trying to make this complicated," they said. "We just want to feel safe." Marcus didn't raise his voice. "So do I," he replied. That quiet answer shifted something, but because it reminded the room that he was part of the conversation, not outside of it, he continued. "But safety built on assumptions can create a different kind of risk." The organizer leaned forward slightly, interested now. "What kind of risk?" he asked. Marcus took a small breath before answering. "The kind where people are treated differently based on how they look, instead of what they do." The room grew quieter, not silent, but more aware. A woman crossed her arms. "That's not what this is about," she said. Marcus nodded. "I hope not," he replied, "but some of the language being used suggests otherwise." There was a slight tension now, the kind that builds when people feel challenged but don't want to admit it. Another man spoke, his tone more controlled. "Are you saying we shouldn't take precautions?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm saying precautions should be based on behavior, not perception." The difference was small in words, but large in meaning. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. Another person glanced at their neighbor, whispering something too quiet to hear. Marcus didn't rush. He let the silence work. Then he added, "If we create policies that rely on people deciding who looks like they belong, We're leaving room for bias to guide those decisions. The organizer tapped his pen lightly against the table, thinking, "That's a fair point," he said slowly. Not everyone agreed. But no one interrupted. Marcus sat down again, his expression unchanged. The discussion continued, but it felt different now. People chose their words more carefully. Some repeated their earlier points, but with less certainty. Others introduced new ideas, ones that focused more on actions, on clear guidelines, rather than vague impressions. Time passed. Eventually, the organizer stood again. "We'll move to a vote," he said. He explained the options clearly. One followed the original proposal, with broader authority for monitoring and reporting. The other included revisions, emphasizing behavior-based policies and clearer definitions. Hands were raised, counted, checked again. The result wasn't unanimous, but it was clear. The revised proposal passed. A quiet shift moved through the room. Some people nodded, others remained still, processing what had just happened. The meeting began to break apart, chairs scraping softly against the floor as people stood and gathered their things. Conversations resumed, but in smaller, quieter tones. Marcus remained seated for a moment, watching. A man approached him hesitantly. "You made a good point," he said. Marcus looked up. "I just asked a question," he replied. The man nodded, then walked away. Another person passed by, offering a small, thoughtful glance but no words. Marcus picked up his notebook and stood, moving toward the exit at the same calm pace he had entered. As he stepped outside, the evening air felt different from the room he had just left. The street was quiet again, the neighborhood unchanged on the surface, but something inside that building had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Because sometimes change doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room. It comes from saying the one thing no one else is willing to say, and letting it sit long enough for people to really hear it. Marcus stepped out onto the sidewalk, the door closing softly behind him, but he didn't leave right away. The night air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that follows after a room full of voices finally settles. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and a few people lingered near the entrance, continuing conversations in lower tones than before. He stood there for a moment, not in a rush, just observing. The same people who had spoken with confidence inside were now more measured, their words slower, their expressions thoughtful. It wasn't a complete shift, but it was enough to notice. A couple stood a few feet away, talking quietly. "I didn't think about it like that," the woman said. "Yeah," the man replied. "I guess it could be taken the wrong way." Marcus didn't look at them directly, but he heard enough. Because that was how change often started. Not with agreement, but with reconsideration. He began walking down the street, his pace steady, the soft sound of his footsteps blending into the quiet of the neighborhood. Houses lined the road, each one similar but slightly different. Lights glowing in windows, silhouettes moving behind curtains. This was the same place people were trying to protect, the same place they called safe. But safety, Marcus knew, wasn't just about keeping something out. It was also about how people inside were treated. As he reached the corner, he paused briefly, looking back toward the community center. The building looked the same as before, nothing about it revealing the conversation that had taken place inside. But that didn't mean nothing had changed, because conversations like that didn't disappear. They stayed with people. In small ways, in quiet thoughts that returned later, in the way someone hesitated before making the same assumption again. Marcus continued walking, his mind not replaying the conversation, but understanding its impact. He had seen it before, in different settings, different groups, different situations. The pattern was familiar, but so was the possibility of breaking it. Further down the street, he passed a man standing near his car, unlocking the door. The man glanced at Marcus briefly, then looked away, then looked back again. For a moment, there was that same quiet tension, the kind that didn't need words. Marcus noticed it, but he didn't react. He simply nodded once, a small, calm acknowledgement. The man hesitated, then returned the nod. It was a simple exchange, but it mattered, because moments like that could go in different directions. And tonight, it didn't go the usual way. Marcus kept walking. The neighborhood grew quieter as he moved further away from the center. The sounds of conversation faded, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. He thought about the meeting again, not in terms of who was right or wrong, but in terms of what had shifted. No one had stood up and admitted fault. No one had made a dramatic apology, but something had still changed. The way people listened, the way they paused, the way they questioned something they hadn't questioned before. That was enough, for now, because real change didn't happen in a single moment. It happened in layers, in repeated moments that slowly built something different. As he reached his car, Marcus unlocked it and paused before getting in. He rested his hand lightly on the door, looking out at the street one more time. He knew not everyone in that room would walk away thinking differently. Some would hold on to their original views, some would dismiss what he said, but others wouldn't. Others would carry it with them. And the next time they sat in a room like that, or stood in a moment where a decision had to be made, there would be a pause, a question, a second thought. And sometimes that was all it took. Marcus got into his car and closed the door, the quiet of the interior wrapping around him. He started the engine, the soft vibration filling the space as the headlights cut through the darkness ahead. As he drove away, the community center disappeared behind him, blending back into the neighborhood like it had never held anything significant. But Marcus knew better. Because the most important changes were never the ones you could see immediately. They were the ones that stayed beneath the surface, shaping what people did next. And tonight had planted something, not loud, not obvious, but real. And real change, even when it started small, had a way of growing in ways people didn't expect.